Now, lastly, on Sarah's country, the conditional ban on live cattle exports has been lifted here in New Zealand, but until a wider review is finalised, exporters must continue to meet all existing requirements. The absolute ban on livestock exports was imposed the 22nd of September this year, while the Ministry for Primary Industries launched an independent review into the animal welfare assurances it receives from exporters following the tragic loss of Gulf Livestock One. Brent Wallace, a livestock exporter, joins us now. Brent, talking about those particular requirements, are they more than what you were traditionally doing?
It's probably it's a little bit different. Most exporters have been using those laws and regulations for a long time. It's just basically, I guess, making it more formal over here. A lot of Australian exporters, that's just standard in Australia, how they operate out of there.
So basically, taking what Australia do well, and they do big numbers of live exports in comparison to New Zealand, to set a bit of a benchmark until that review is finished?
Yeah, look, I mean, what they've brought in so far, it has been good for the industry. But it's still, for me, I think we're still a long way off. This 90% loading, it's good for, like, out of Australia, that's 6 months of the year what they do, and then the rest of the 6 months, it can be sort of up to 70-80% less loading. So, we're getting there slowly. Yeah.
And what sort of flow-on effect is that happening to cattle in quarantine here in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, the government's just, and the MPI just taking a little bit more, closer looks at certain things, how we load vessels, obviously weights, square metres per animal. They've definitely tightened up on that across the board, which, to be fair, they probably should have been doing that all the way through.
Yeah, so this is a positive, what is coming out of it from your eyes as a livestock exporter, that whatever does come out of it is better than a ban.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think the way I sort of view it is, because we've had this disaster, we shouldn't be tightening up our rules, regulations just because of a maritime disaster. This sort of stuff should have been happening years ago. It's just obviously making us a bit more accountable of what we're doing. Obviously what we do is all about animal welfare. It's a disaster doesn't need to be enforcing the rules, really.
Mm-hmm. And what about in terms of industry regulation, and what type of structures could be in place for that going forward that you think?
I think definitely we've still got a more focus on the big picture with stocking densities on boats, and whether it's going out of here and on winter time into a northern hemisphere summer. I think we've got to look at rules of going less than that. Pregnant cattle, I think we've got to have a review through to who we've got trading out of this country as far as exporters go, and who's signing up to get export certificates. To get an export certificate, it is pretty easy. You pay $300 to $500, and then you can sort of go and export animals. But in saying that too, that's only sort of part of it. The main thing is what we say is this AWAC, which is Animal Welfare Export Certificate. That's pretty much if you can get that signed off, ticked off as you're going through, that's the key part to it. But I think we've just got to get stricter on the credibility of exporters. Like, anyone can get a license. I think the government's really got to enforce, and if you've got an operation started, who's credible within that organisation to actually pull this off and do it correctly. So guys with industry knowledge, that's based on what I'm sort of saying there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard from you last time here on Sarah's Country, your years and decades of experience in terms of stockmanship on the boats in Australia, and you understand this, and this is where your opinion's coming from. Normally, Australia would send 120,000 cattle to New Zealand, and to China, and New Zealand sitting around that 20 to 60,000 mark. But it appears that the demand from China is not going anywhere. So for us to be able to continue this particular industry, what's happening now, you're saying, is just part and parcel of operating globally within all of the competing markets to have market access to China.
That 120,000 out of Australia, that's just breeding stock to China. That's without the slaughter side of things. New Zealand, we're looking at 120 to 130,000 this year alone, and reports I'm getting out of China at the moment, there's forward contracts for next year, which numbers are talking through the roof, and to the point that we simply won't be able to supply that many cattle. And that's sort of just the growing demand from obviously Australia and China having their little bit of a domestic at the moment. And also, we've got to be mindful, you've got countries like Chile sort of on their, coattails, just sort of waiting. Basically, the 6 or 8 week ban we had, that sort of opened the door for cattle to come out of Chile and to China. There's obviously a few issues which popped up pretty quickly over a couple shipments. Now that demand swung back onto New Zealand, obviously the ban's lifted, and it's gone a little bit mad, to be fair.
So therefore, what sort of prices for heifers are we talking?
Frisian heifers at the moment, F12 and better. The prices come out at the moment for $2,000 for a sort of a January, February delivery. Unrecorded stuff, that's sort of getting up to $1,500, $1,800. Whereas, heifers sort of this time last year was right down to sort of $1,300. So the demand's just growing.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. Brent Wallace, the livestock exporter. And the ban has been lifted on live exports here in New Zealand following the tragedy of Gulf Livestock 1. However, the industry is under review from MPI. And you can read more on the story on farmersweekly.co.nz. Annette Scott has been following the live exports very, very closely.
This is Sarah's Country.